During my childhood and adolescence, I lived in a state where the beach, waterfalls, and mountains were very close to each other. About an hour or an hour and a half would get you from the beach to the mountains, and from there to waterfalls, trails, etc. I always loved nature. Not to the point of hugging trees or thinking about becoming vegan, but I loved being grounded with my feet in the earth, mud, leaves, rivers, and so on. I used to hike, enjoy exploring ruins, and discover little-known places. Sometimes I'd grab my bike and just disappear into the world. Some of these adventures and trails were with friends, others just me, my bike, and my MP3 player. This was before the internet was at everyone's fingertips, and if there was GPS, I didn't have access to it. On one of my exploits, I decided to explore a lesser-known trail to reach a famous waterfall complex. I had already visited the regular route, but I wanted something new to break the monotony, to feel alive. So I had the brilliant idea of taking a route I had never tried before, and, to follow my wild instincts, I decided to go alone, without telling anyone, not my friends, my brother, my mom, relatives, or even God. So, I left home with supplies, apples, bananas to prevent cramps, some isotonic drinks, and sandwiches. After cycling nearly 70 kilometers, I reached the regular route that led to the waterfall, but by then, I was determined to continue on the alternate path. I left my bike with some locals who made a living selling snacks, overpriced groceries. I don't judge. It's better to buy from them than go all the way back to the city. I explained my plan and agreed to pay them a little tip to guard my bike until I returned around 6 p.m. I started down the alternative path at exactly 10 a.m. I had a Speedo watch, a gift from my uncle, to track my time while cycling. It was fancy and expensive for that time. My phone was a Nokia 2112, and it wasn't reliable. About half an hour into the woods, things started to feel a bit strange. I felt like I wasn't alone. Although I couldn't see anyone, when I walked, I could hear footsteps close to me. And when I stopped, they would stop. At this point, it's important to mention that I've never used any drugs, nor even tried them. My only addiction was, and still is, women with eyes like Eva Green's. Someone whose gaze tells you she's walked through hell barefoot without complaining, and still lit a cigarette while her body was burning or submerged in hot lava. I'm saying this so you don't think I'm imagining things or that I'm some stoner. No offense to those who use, it's just not my thing. Continuing, when I checked my watch, 55 minutes had passed, and I had no idea where I was. I was still being followed. In my head, I thought, if I've been walking for almost an hour, I must be close. It's better to keep going than to turn back. So, I kept walking for another half hour with no sign of a trail, path, or any trace of humanity. I tried calling someone to let them know what was going on, but there was no signal. Anyone who knows a Nokia 2112 knows that it didn't have GPS, WhatsApp, internet, or anything useful except the Snake 2 game. Really good, by the way, but no internet to help me. I thought to myself again, if I've been walking for almost an hour and a half, it's close. I won't panic. I'll keep going and I'll find the damn waterfall. I decided to eat 2 sandwiches to boost my energy, a banana, and to mark my path, I hung the banana peel on a tree and kept moving. I walked for another 40 minutes, and by this point, I must admit I was starting to lose it mentally. No signs of human life, just forest, the feeling of being followed, no signal, but I remembered that sharks are born swimming. If I lost my head, the situation could get worse. I decided to get to a higher place to see if I could get a signal. After walking for another 20 minutes, I started hearing the sound of falling water. I felt at peace and just decided to follow the sound. When I found the source of the sound, it was indeed a waterfall, but not the one I was used to. It had a drop of about 12 meters at most, and the water was clear enough to see life beneath it. It was also somewhat hidden, like a secret clearing. Despite feeling strange, I was exhausted and sweaty, so I put my stuff aside and went to swim, taking the chance to enjoy the moment. It was 12:30 when I entered the water, and I stayed for about half an hour, waiting to see if anyone else would show up. I even shouted in gratitude for finding the place, but there was no sign of human life. I dried off, reflected for another half hour, and then decided to head back the way I came. I figured it would take me another hour and a half, so I planned to make the most of the daylight. When I returned to the trail, once again, with every step I took, it was as if someone else was walking the same path as me. and when I stopped, they stopped too. I was carrying a Bowie knife on my belt, and all I could think was, if this is someone trying to rob a clueless tourist, they're going to regret it. I realized, because I had some experience with other things, that what was following me was supernatural. My knife wouldn't do any damage, and the best thing to do was to continue on my path. If I had moved 20 meters away from the waterfall, that was a lot, and the sound of the water had simply stopped. I turned back a little because I was curious, but there was no sound. I kept going back and still nothing. Finally, I decided to return to the exact spot, and to my surprise, there was no waterfall. It was just a clearing, but the trunk where I had left my things was the same. It just wasn't a waterfall anymore. I felt disoriented at that moment. I realized and concluded that either I had crossed some sort of portal, or there was something in my sandwiches. I didn't want to linger there, so when I started to leave, it was exactly 4 p.m. Couldn't believe it. I took my phone out of my backpack, and sure enough, it was 4 p.m. Time had flown by. I was disturbed, thinking I would certainly miss the sunlight to get back, and in my panic, I tried to jog to gain time, hoping to use the remaining light. After I had gone about 50 meters, I heard the sound of a waterfall ahead. Something surreal, but in a way it comforted me because I thought I was close to the waterfall I knew. However, to my shock, when I approached, I realized it wasn't the one I was familiar with. This waterfall was high, almost 20 meters, its waters dark, with a heavy, negative energy. And like in a movie or a video game, there was a cave beneath it. Inside the cave, I noticed a presence, unmistakably not human. It was something humanoid, a greenish color, like a catfish, but with a wrinkled face. They were crouching, naked, a sort of amphibian human creature, hairless. From what I could see quickly, there were 3 creatures, one bulky, one slimmer, and the other frail. Just as I was startled by their appearance, they seemed startled too, retreating into the back of the cave. All I could think was that I had gone too far. I tried to backtrack quietly, without making any noise, not wanting to lose sight of what I had seen. Then, something behind me whispered almost in my ear, "Don't go back this way, and don't look back." I froze, gently pulling out my knife, and heard, "You don't need that. I want to guide you, just don't look back." The urge to look back was intense, but I didn't do it. I remembered that if you look at an entity and it realizes you've seen it, bad things happen. At that point, I didn't know what it was, but since it didn't sound threatening, I didn't see any reason not to follow the instructions. I was told to continue down the path ahead of me, but not to step into the dark water. When I saw some things ahead, I shouldn't stare, be frightened, just follow them. I walked for about 20 meters without stepping into the water, just following the edge. Ahead, there were 2 creatures that looked very much like fairies, but they had no wings. They were about 30 centimeters tall, with grayish skin like a shark, elongated heads, big dark eyes that looked wet, thin necks, long arms like twigs, and legs to match. Their only peculiar feature was a single tooth in the middle of their mouths. I couldn't tell if they were smiling at me, and I heard, "Don't stare, don't smile, just follow them," so I did. With surprising agility for their size, one of them turned its back to me and jumped almost a meter ahead. The other jumped to join it and jumped another meter. I understood that this was the path I had to follow, and this continued for about 300 meters, always with that rhythm. At one point, they stopped, looked at me, and then turned their gaze forward again. I understood the message. I should leave through there. The presence behind me had fallen silent throughout the journey, and I deduced that it had vanished. When I thought about it, I didn't even react or look back. I just thought it told me, "Don't look back, your path is ahead of you." I heard laughter, voices, shouting, certainly from humans, just beyond the forest where the fairies had stopped. Before I left, I paused without looking back and said, "Thank you for what you've done for me, and I'm sorry if I entered where I shouldn't have. That was never my intention." I heard, "That's exactly why you're leaving. Go." I stepped out, and as soon as I crossed, it was like breaking through a field, a barrier that offered slight resistance. It was still afternoon, and I found myself at the waterfall I had originally set out for. The people there saw me pale, and they came to ask if I was okay. That's when I told them my story. When I looked at my watch, to my astonishment, it was 4:01 p.m. I asked the other people what time it was, and they all confirmed it was indeed 4:01 p.m. They mocked my story, thought I had taken some drugs, and dismissed it. I left, and when I picked up my bike, I shared my experience with the locals. Unlike those at the waterfall, they told me I wasn't the first person to mention these two waterfalls, the clear and the dark, and they believed it was a mystical place. According to other reports, the small creatures were indeed fairies, and the one that spoke to me was the forest itself or its spirit, a manifestation of it. The three humanoid creatures might have been someone who didn't follow the instructions, a lost family, or just a kind of being from that realm or world. As I got older, I researched them online in grimoires and books about what they could be, but never found a plausible explanation, even exploring different cultures, Brazilian folklore, Celtic, Japanese, Mexican, and so on. I never attempted that trail again, not even the regular one, and that was yet another supernatural experience I had, something inexplicable.